What's up, Resonate Church? My name is Brian Jones. I'm on staff here in Missoula, go Grizz. And I also work for our network as the summer coordinator. So I've spent a lot of summers with some of you who are watching today, some of the best summers of my life. And if you haven't yet, you should probably go to Elevate. As a part of my job, one of the fun things that I get to do is I get to bounce around and study and prep in different places for the summer, and I also get to spend a little bit of time on campus. And for myself, it's actually been a lifelong dream of mine to be a regular at a coffee shop. So I don't know if anyone can relate to that, and I'm sure many of you can, but for myself, I just imagined it would be so wonderful if I could actually walk into a local coffee shop. They would know my name and my order, and I would start my day like that. So fun fact, I'm actually a regular. It happened. My lifelong dream came true. And there's a hip spot here in Missoula called Clyde Coffee that I've been going to for the past 3 years. So when I walk in, actually every single time, the barista, actually a few of them know this, they pull out a mug that's the same size as that I like to get every single time. It's a 12-ounce grandpa looking mug, and they say, "Drip today?" And I'm like, "Yes, you know, every time you know what I want. This is amazing." So I take the mug and get the coffee. But over the past 3 years, I've become friends with these people who know my order. I know their names, I know what they're into, and they know what I do. So one day I walk in, and they're like, "Brian, how's it going? Here's your grandpa mug." They're like, "Drip today?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I want. That's what I get every time." And the barista asked me, she said, "What are you working on today?" And I said, "Today I'm actually doing a little bit of research on digital addiction." And she's like, "No way." I was like, "Wait, what? Why? Why would you say that?" And she said a year ago, she said she was tracking her time on her phone, like the time that she used her phone every single day, and she was clocking it about 8 hours a day. And it led to the point in her life where she had a panic attack one day. And she was like, "I can't believe I've been this far sucked into my phone. I don't even know who I am anymore." So she said she panicked and she went to the Verizon store and traded her smartphone in for a flip phone. She tried to do something about it. And she said, "The reason I just responded the way I didn't mean to scare you." She said, just actually this week, after a whole year of not using a smartphone, I just went back and got one again. And she said, "I'm so scared, to be honest with you." So whatever you learn as you're studying digital addiction, could you just tell me what you're learning? I was like, of course I will. But if you're anything like this girl or like myself, you probably have wrestled at some point in your life with digital addiction or seen someone around you who is consumed with it. And we have to ask ourselves the question over time, what is it doing to us and what are we going to do about it? So I'm excited in this series to talk to you today about digital use and how you can be a person who follows Jesus in a digital world. A part of my research, as I was studying, I came across a guy, and maybe you've heard of him before, but his name is Tristan Harris. He was the former product manager at Google, and he actually went viral for his advocacy against big tech companies that are persuading our brains. And in an interview with Wired magazine, he said this, and I'm going to read it to you. He said, "Technology steers what 2 billion people are thinking and believing every day. It's possibly the largest source of influence over 2 billion people's thoughts that has ever been created. Religions and governments don't have that much influence over people's daily thoughts. But we have 3 technology companies who have this system that frankly they don't even have control over, with news feeds and recommended videos and whatever they put in front of you, which is governing what people do with their time and what they're looking at." He goes on to talk about the reality of thousands of engineers working for YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to persuade you to look longer, scroll more, buy more, from notifications to bright colors, to audio, video play, recommended photos, clothing, destinations, all being fed by an economic boom in advertising. Basically, he's suggesting that the internet has the ability to build your life for you, playing into all your insecurities, secret habits, and actually persuading your desires. Not supporting, but dictating. A recent study on mental health and digital use shows that in the past 10 years, there has been a radical spike in depression and anxiety among social media users. Before the outbreak of the recent global pandemic, on average, digital users were unlocking their devices 80 times a day. Upon the demand of recent events to stay at home and connect digitally, screen time has radically increased according to the National Alliance of Mental Health. 1 in 5 people would say they are suffering from some sort of mental health issue. In an article on digital use among teens from The Atlantic, research says there is not a single exception. All screen activities are linked to less happiness, and all non-screen activities are linked to more happiness. 8th graders who spend 10 or more hours a week on social media are 56% more likely to say they're unhappy than those who devote less time to social media. The opposite is true of in-person interactions, surprisingly. Those who spend an above average amount of time with their friends in person are 20% less likely to say they're unhappy than those who hang out for a below average amount of time. The more time teens spend looking at screens, the more likely they are to report symptoms of depression. I think we all feel this. Now, I just want to say this. I have no agenda against our digital world. I'm not trying to persuade you to be a minimalist or go off the grid, although some of you would really like that. Maybe you're already doing that, but also some of you would absolutely hate that. So I'm not suggesting that. Today, I want to suggest that we look inward to assess our lives. The scary thing is to actually stop, to look back, to reverse engineer your own life, how you got the things in your home, the clothes on your body, to push a little deeper, the desires in your heart. Where did they come from? What informed the life you're living? We may be tempted to believe that we can do whatever we want in our digital worlds without it warping our soul. We might actually believe that. And over time, the truth is, you become what you consume. Or to put more simply, or maybe more common terms, we become like what we like. If we hold something close and spend time with it, it becomes part of who we are. It's a curious habit to go on liking things every day. The feature that pops up on your social media that allows you to like things. But beyond that feature, we are likers and lovers of what we observe. Just because you don't double tap something doesn't mean you don't like it. We're constantly approving and disapproving of what we see. The more we scroll, the more we are building a worldview of likes and dislikes. Over time, my likes and my dislikes become my subconscious moral compass. And this is the lie that we believe. The lie we believe is that I can live in the world and consume the world without becoming like the world. We believe that lie. For me personally, in the spring of 2019, I came face to face with the reality that I might actually be addicted to my phone. For whatever reason, I couldn't stop picking it up and scrolling through different things, different accounts, and watching recommended videos. Was it that I was lonely or bored or hunting for something? I couldn't be sure. But as a result, I knew that this was happening to me, and I made the decision to spend, at the time I didn't know how long, but it ended up being 3 months away from any portal that could lock me into endless scrolling and searching. So I deleted all of my social media and any other wormhole type apps and sort of made my smartphone a dumb phone. I did exactly what this barista suggested to me that she did. In the following weeks, as I searched my heart and journaled and let my eyes drift to different things, and processed what my phone had done to me over time, I discovered that a few things had changed about my life. The way that I observe beauty had changed because of what I had scrolled through. The way that I observe value and success had changed because of what I had scrolled and clicked through. My values were more reflected in accounts I had been following than my allegiance to Jesus. If I become like what I like, I have to ask, what am I close to and what is it doing to me? And what worldview does it agree with? So, hang in there. Here's a quick recap. What you're close to shapes your thoughts and your feelings. And your thoughts and your feelings shape your desires. Tech companies are spending billions of dollars to keep you close to your phone. This may be one of the most important and simple truths that our generation must take seriously. So, is there a way to avoid a mental health crisis? Is there a way to avoid years of our lives peeling away with our necks bent? To avoid letting my soul be warped by my digital use? John, Jesus' good friend, disciple, weighs in on the conversation in some thoughts that were formed in his time with Jesus. And he says this. We're going to be in 1 John chapter 2 today, so you can flip there with me or open up your app if you prefer, and if not, I'm sure it'll be on the screen. We're going to start in verse 15, and here's what it says. Here's what John says, starting in verse 15. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. Now, I want to make two observations according to the text, and before I do, I want to make a short disclaimer about the beginning of this passage in verse 15, where John says, do not love the world. Just to be really clear, John is not saying this is not an instruction to not be loving to the world. John is giving a warning against a devotion to a world system that is opposed to God. We know that Jesus was close and walked near to the world, but his devotion was absolutely to God, and so shall ours. The first observation I want to make from the text in the second part of verse 15 is that loving the world prevents us from truly loving the Father. The text is saying to love the Father, to love God, is to completely give myself to him as he has completely gave himself to us. Not to give him only my external world, but to let him behind my passcode on my phone, let him behind the login on my accounts, to peek into my digital world and surrender my internal loves to him. Because if I don't, it pulls me away from the Father. It splits my love between the world and the Father. Further, if we hold on to our internal loves, it leads to anxiety, restlessness, insecurity, comparison, or as the scriptures say in verse 16, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. There's a guy who works for desiringgod.com. If you're familiar, he is sort of the person that publicizes all the content online, and he does all of their online things. And he actually wrote a book called 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. And he lists 12 ways that as we interact with our digital worlds, that they're actually changing us. And as I read this book, there was a paragraph that leapt out at me that I think is helpful to understand what we're talking about. He says this: too often what my phone exposes in me is not the holy desires of what I know I should want, not even what I think I want, and especially not what I want you to think I want. My phone screen divulges in razor-sharp pixels what my heart really wants. The glowing screen on my phone projects into my eyes the desires and loves that live in the most abstract corners of my heart and soul, finding visible expression in pixels of images, videos, and text for me to see and consume and type and share. This means whatever happens on my smartphone, especially under the guise of anonymity, is the true expose of my heart, reflected into full color pixels back into my eyes. Honestly, this may explain the passcodes. To get into a phone is to peek into the interior of another's soul. And we may be too ashamed for others to see what we clicked and opened and chased around online. When I read this paragraph, I had this picture of someone over my shoulder, like someone, like a close friend of mine, over my shoulder as I tap and click and scroll through my phone. And I thought to myself, would I be proud or absolutely ashamed if that person that I maybe didn't know was there walked around and looked at me? And there was something about that picture in my head that actually filled me with shame. That I don't know what it is, but I actually have two seemingly different worlds in my life. Like one that happens on the interior part of my life, behind the passcode of my phone, and then also another world of like the way that I want the world to see me and know me, who I want to be known for. And a lot of times those worlds don't line up. What's it like for you? Because as I observe, there's something really real that happens to our souls as we interact with the digital world. We fall in love with it. And to love the world puts an actual barrier between us and God. If you're asking yourself the question, why do I feel so far from God right now? Check your consumption. Because to check your consumption is to check your love. There's this church in Portland. They decided they were going to have a new strategy to reach their city. So the pastor said, hey, instead of doing small groups in homes and stuff at our church, we actually want to send you into the city, to the bars, to the clubs, the different places where we can actually share the gospel in person with people. And he said as they sent their church out for multiple months, at the end of that year, they reflected on sort of some things that had happened in their church. And they realized that instead of leaving the fingerprints of Jesus all over the city, that their church came back and looked more like the world. They had been colonized to look more like Portland. The strategy wasn't bad. We know Jesus, because of his love for people, was close to them and went to them. We just have to be people that are aware enough to understand that we drift and become like our surroundings. And the same is true about our internal world, not just this church's experience going into the city. This is the experience we have going in and behind the passcodes of our phone. We drift and become like our consumption. Loving the world prevents us from truly loving the Father. A second observation I want to make from the text in verse 17. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. This means, our second point here, is that our devotion determines our direction. Our devotion determines our direction. If our devotion is to the world, then our direction leads to death. If our devotion is to do the will of God, then our direction is towards life. The hard part about this verse is it sounds so simple, but its practice is so costly. To give my devotion to God means that I'm constantly surrendering my desires to Him. The outplay of a world with whose devotion is surrendered to the world looks like the statistics we started with. It looks like the girl across the counter, the barista who had a panic attack. It's a mental health crisis. It's isolation. It feels really good to stop what I'm doing and check my phone 80 times a day, but then it hurts for a few years. It feels good to get my affirmation from the world, and then it hurts. I'm going to get really real for a second. If I'm the enemy and I'm trying to take down Resonate Church, I'm not going after the sermons to try to make them bad. I'm not trying to make small groups awkward. I'm not trying to make the merch subpar. What I'm going to do, if I'm the enemy and I'm trying to take down Resonate Church, I'm going to go after the leaders. And I'm actually going to go into their digital use. And what I'd do is I'd actually slide in, along with their interaction and their love for Jesus, I would slowly slide in different worldviews from other accounts. I would actually give them just enough of the world, tap by tap, to make them look a little bit like Jesus and a little bit like the world. Then, when people following them and see their lives get really close, they have no reference point for change. They just look more like the world than they do like Jesus. They have no reference point for total freedom. They just look lukewarm. Over time, they've consumed enough of the worldview of the world that they look like the world. And they also look a little bit like Jesus. The movement slows down and the people show up to stuff. They still make new friends, but really, they just can't wait to get back to their home and do whatever they want. Lukewarm. This is a term that Jesus used to call out the church in the book of Revelation called Laodicea. The church had exchanged their radical love for Jesus with a love for Jesus shared with a love for wealth. While the city was known for doing generous things for others, it was shared with an ungodly desire to be personally wealthy. Jesus compares them to the access to water they had in their cities, which actually flowed from two other cities who had useful water, hot water and cold water, which flowed down from higher elevation cities. But before it got into the city of Laodicea, the water connected before it flowed in, creating useless, lukewarm water. This is what a church looks like that has been deceived and has a shared devotion. And a confession, I feel that. That guy is me. This isn't just a call out. This is a reality that we all deal with. But there is really good news for us, Resonate Church. There is an invitation in the Bible to release control of your will. It's an outrageous offer. It's the ultimate countercultural invitation to stop taking control of your life, but to actually surrender it. And Jesus makes the invitation himself. He says this in Matthew 11. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He also says this in John 6:35. He says, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never thirst." The things you are looking for in your digital world, it's like, I have that. That's actually here with me. Don't be deceived. Come to me to find rest. Leave anxiety behind. Come to me to find fullness. Come to me to quench your thirst. There's an exchange that happens when we surrender to Jesus. We trade out our will, our world, for his will and his world. This means my internal world is surrendered to him, and he gives with great joy. He gives me his internal world. That means my external world is given to him, and he gives me his eyes for the world. Surrendering to God is a devastating exchange. It means you lose everything, and God, by his great justice and mercy, by his grace, gives you a whole new world. He replaces anxiety in this world with peace for your soul, rest for the weary. It means where junk is piled up in your mind, in your heart, your hurt, he replaces with streams of living water and nourishes your soul. It's the greatest exchange the world will ever know, the one where dead people come to life. This is the life that we have in Jesus, Resonate Church. We don't have to be bound to our phones. We don't have to be mastered by our digital world. We actually have the ability to receive the offering that Christ gives us in a new life, a new heart, a renewed mind, and step into new life with him. But it cannot happen when our loves are divided between our internal worlds and our external worlds. So I want to get really practical. So how can you Resonate Church, how can you actually surrender your internal world to God and receive the fullness that He has for you? It means actually taking practical action steps towards Him of surrender. So here are 4 digital hacks, 4 things to consider as you move forward in your personal life with your phone or in your digital sphere, whether that's your laptop or whatever you use. And let's start here. Number 1, know why you're reaching. I believe firmly that there's only a few reasons you would reach for your phone. You get a notification, or maybe you are bored. You remembered you needed to do something, to call someone, look at the weather, set an alarm, or maybe you have no idea why you reached for your phone. You either know why, or you subconsciously just reached for it because you were bored. So you either reach for what I call utility or vulnerability. You reach for utility because the reason you reach for your phone actually accomplishes something. Or you reach in vulnerability because you reach for your phone because you have no idea why. Therefore, you open up the first thing that's glowing at you, you tap through it and scroll through it, and then 30 minutes later you realize, wow, I just burned a lot of time that I didn't intend on burning. I just consumed some things that I didn't intend on consuming. Our goal as Christians should be to master our phones, not the other way around. So, number 1, know why you're reaching. Number 2, make decisions about when you are going to use your phone or your devices and when you're not. Don't let it tell you when to use it. So similar to this first point, but a few recommendations I have. Turn off all notifications besides text and phone calls. Just turn them off. There's no reason your phone should tell you to look at it. Number 2, this has been a practice of mine for the past 3 or 4 years, and something that my wife and I do in marriage is we sleep with our phones outside the room. There's a certain point of the day where you actually need to put your phone to bed. It's a practice of like tucking it in by plugging it in and leaving it in another room. Don't let your phone be the thing that keeps you up into the night. Don't let your phone be the thing that separates you from your spouse. We actually need to put our electronic devices away. This is recommended for me. I've noticed that it has significantly improved my mental health because I am most vulnerable at night when I lay down and when I wake up. So if my mind is already hunting for something at night, the best thing I can do is leave my phone in another room. Or if I want to wake up and get something immediately, instead of letting my phone tell me some stuff or breathe lies into my life, I actually get to wake up without that and leave it in the other room. Another thing that I would suggest, if you're really struggling to not look at your phone, I would talk to your huddle and confess your phone use to them. Tell them exactly where you're at. Because maybe some of these steps forward are not the right steps for you personally, and the best way you can take a step forward is by letting people close to you in your life know what you're actually doing. Here's the third thing. Take inventory of the accounts that influence you the most. So here's what that means. To actually look at your phone, to open up different apps, and write down the apps or the people in your life, those that you follow that have the most influence over your life, and then write down, what are they selling? And ask yourself, in the long haul, is this the thing that I want to consume? Am I going to become more like the world by following these accounts, or am I going to become more like Jesus? Take an account and know where your mind is drifting. Know where your heart is drifting, where your loves are drifting. You can actually practically name them. Number 4, the fourth tip, the fourth way that I think that our church can step forward and not be mastered by our phones, but take mastery over them, is to do stuff you're proud of with your phone. I love in the beginning of 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. John Piper writes the introduction, and he says, I could have never written this book. When I look at my digital devices, I look at them with worship. I look at my iPad that I've preached hundreds of sermons from. I look at my computer where I've sat down and I've studied the things of God. I look at my phone that I use to call my friends and pray for them. These have been the delights, the extension of God's kingdom, of God's truth to a lost world. but he knew that that was uncommon. That's not actually likely the case for many of us, that we don't use them for that thing. So what we have to do as a church is to actually exchange the way we consume with actually giving. So some practical ways to do that is, if there is time that you're killing in your schedule where you're scrolling and consuming, that it's good to think about retraining and putting a new habit in place. So maybe that looks like texting friends and encouraging them, or actually replacing apps that actually pull you into them with apps that really benefit you. Maybe learn a new language. Maybe actually memorize some scripture. Maybe change the format of your phone so it changes the format of your heart and your mind. To begin calling people and encouraging them instead of getting sucked watching their lives from afar. We have to do stuff that we're proud of with our phones. Well, my prayer for our church is that we would actually flip the narrative. That instead of being mastered by our digital world, let's surrender our digital world to God and let Him use us to be a people who master them for the sake of movement. Let's pray. God, I pray that we would feel a sense of urgency and desperation to be more like you. And God, I pray that you would break through. You would break through in our church and lead us towards a way that's full to follow your will and your way instead of our habits and our desires. God, would you transform our minds and our hearts as we spend time with you, as we dive into our habits, our secret worlds. God, I pray that there be a world in front of us that's new, God, where we would submit to you and surrender our lives to you. So we thank you that you've given us access to interact with our friends, interact with the world, and God, I pray that you would use us to change the world, to master our devices. So we love you, Jesus. We thank you for your word and your way. We pray this in your name. Amen.